of the Mount Carmel Center during the siege. The FBI requested that this video be taken in order to show that the kids were safe. It's also one of the videos that the FBI refused to release to the public until after everything was said and done because they did not want anybody having sympathy for the Davidians. Let's get into it.
Today is Tuesday, Monday, 8th of March. It is about 4:30 in the afternoon. David, if you'd like to say, first of all, thanks for the discussion with on the phone. We're very artistic portrait of what we perceive each of these fine gentlemen to be. I'd like to share it with my family, seeing that, of course, obviously everyone in the world knows something about it. We just thought we'd break the ice and allow people to see exactly, what kind of people we have here. Let's start off first of all with my oldest son. His name is Cyrus. Look over here. How old are you? 7. Say hello to everybody. You got him. The camera right there. What do you think about all this, man? You don't know? You have faith in God? Okay. And we wave to all your friends out there that we're taking to the from the outside. What would you like to have if you could have anything? What would you like to have? You don't know? Would you like to ride your motorcycle today? Well, tell me you got a motorcycle. Anyway, Bill and Jim, how you doing? Rose and John, Gary, Henry, John, there's another John too. You know, and don't forget Dick. Okay, we'll talk to these people later. Okay. Who's your sister? Huh? Carl, okay, you want to come talk a little bit? Do you? Yeah. Okay. Are you happy? Thanks for the milk too. You don't drink more, do you? Who drinks the milk? Okay. One star. Talk to you in a bit. Show him Daddy's face. My love baby, right? Huh? You love Daddy? You love all your friends on the outside? See them soon? Do you love God? You a good girl? Say hello to him. The milk. Real loud. What would you like to do today if you could do anything you wanted to? Go on the swing? Okay. Anything else to say? I don't know. It's funny looking at the Okay, wave to him goodbye. Oh, how old are you? Okay. Bye. Love you. And then there's our little baby here. Where's Baba? Mommy. Take that back. Bobby's our little clown. Wave at the camera, Bobby. Wave at the camera. There you go. Hello. Say hello. 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 How old are you, Bobby? Huh? How old are you? 1? 1 year old. What would you like to do today besides drink some of that milk they sent you, huh? Want to drink some milk? Huh? Want some baba? Want some milk? Huh? Want some nana? No. Why, do you have some milk yet? Huh? Okay. Okay, you take it. Take it. Take it. Take it. Thank you. Hey, go mama. Oh. Oh. Okay, go to mama, Bobby. No. You're here. Go to mommy. Come on. Love you. Okay. Come on. Hey, hot rod. Oh, shit. Say hello. They gotta wave at the camera there. What's your name? Uh-huh. David. How old are you? Huh? 3. What's your mama's name? Huh? Nikki? Well, you can talk real good. Tell me your ABCs. Why? Now I know my what? Why don't you come and sing with me? Hey, you want Dick and all them come and sing ABCs with you, son? Huh? Love your daddy? How much you love me? How much? Huh? 3? Love me 3? No more than 3? David, love you. Okay, go get your sister. Pages. Pages. Hey, Pages. What you doing? Look. Pages. Look. Look. Pages. Come here. You want to play the guitar? Come on. Oh, does she want to, huh? Yeah, this is our little girl, Paige. She's sweetie, huh? She's an Australian baby. Half American, half Australian. You want to sing? Pages. 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 Clap your hands, Pages. Clap. Clap. Hey, you want to clap? Clap your hands. Say hello, Dick. Hello, John. Hello, Jim. Hello, guy. She's sweet. Okay, you want to see Mama? You want to sit down here with us for a second? Come and sit down here. Tell a little bit about yourself. How do we meet, Nikki? Loud and clear.
At my parents' house, and I ran a street.
Well, I mean, I came over to get you, didn't I?
Yeah.
And who knew about it?
Everyone.
But I'd met you 2 years before, hadn't I? And of course, you had nothing to do with me whatsoever, right? You know, we've been trying to teach some of our friends here in the FBI the 7 SEALs. And the 7 SEALs are really pretty deep, aren't they, Nick? And like any other theology the world has ever had to offer. And that's why our little challenge in regards to, the question is, what am I doing? How am I doing with all these children? Now, what's really going on here? Well, you know, God is God, and this nation is supposed to honor and serve God. It says in God we trust in eternity. And these children that I have are for a reason. And unless we really have the ear, the eyes to open ourselves up to be able to really read the scriptures and understand the prophecies and a lot of the seven seals, the explanation we've seen on this clearly. But anyway, hopefully God's granting us time to be able to open things up more thoroughly. It's serious stuff here. And I love them. You love them too? Thank you. Hello. Hello. Okay. What would you like to do today? Do anything you want to do? Am I a mean person, maybe?
No.
See you later. No. Is the picture taken? Oh my God. Over here. This is Minor. Say hello. Real loud. Hello. Okay. This is Minor Bird. How old are you, Minor? 2. 2? Love Daddy? Mama doesn't want to be in this picture, does she? She's worried about how she looks, huh? Say hello, Jim. There. Hope all you fellas are so good. Love Daddy? Love everybody here? Are you thankful for the milk? Thanks for the milk. Loud. For the milk. Mine is Parker. I named every one of the children. And as a person observed the nations of the children, they would see that their names, which were given to them ahead of time, they perfectly fulfilled the minor and the taught, like a minor bird, right? A little minor bird. So can you say your ABC? Well, that's summer. Okay. Maybe they'll come and sing with us someday, okay? Okay? I love you, Mina. Okay, bye-bye. You know, what's pronouncing, Kathy? Oh, here's the kicker. This is Chanel. You wanna jump up and down? These are jumpers. This is a very athletic girl. This is Chanel. And this is a body. We tried to tell you, give us time, give you study, everything I would let you do. Remember that, Isabel? But like a lot of people, we get too hasty, and look, what we do, people would not understand naturally at first. Now, look at you. Maybe your grandma might sit down. Say hello. Come on, over here. Go as fast as you can. So, I mean, it's simple. You don't understand these babies. You don't understand such as Dr. Night the shepherd, sheep scattered, my hands on the little one. I mean, there's some things that God has concealed in His written word that are to be brought to you right before the time. The men might see whether they can learn the lesson that you've never learned. You didn't want to learn them. If it wasn't from the hierarchy, if it wasn't from these and the Pharisees, they didn't want to burn it. Anyway, are we happy parents? Until recently we got shot up. But anyway, this is my family, and no one's going to come in on top of my family and start pushing my family. Yeah, it's not going to happen. Ain't going to happen. And I think we've made this very clear, especially when we have a God on our side that lets us know things before time. But anyway, like I said, you don't understand, so you do understand this stuff. Innocent. Oh. Okay, oh, there you go. See one of the holes here? One of them. That look nice? One up higher. Okay. This one went out right here. Is it leaking? Yeah, Steve? That's good. You gotta turn more. Oh. Bleeding again? Oh, well, you can see it anyway. Kind of thing. Oh, it ain't nothing. Some guy like me. Just flash. You. Thanks for the sushi the other day. This thing here, boy, it was knocked out. Just clean cut straight through there, and the flour the skin fat. They cut some of the skin back. It's all skinned on the inside. And can you turn that hand a little bit? That there? Oh, it's really nothing. Okay. Made all the fun though. Miss Sandy, Daddy's girl. Here's the controversy, young lady. Oh, this is my little baby. Her name is Serenity. Why? She's serene. Very serene. What that is there? Camera. Wave at it. Hello, Jim. Say something? Put your hands down. What do you like? Huh? You like ice cream? Love Daddy? Huh? How much you love Daddy? So much. Well, that's a lot. How come you're so serene? Huh? You don't know? How old are you? Huh? 4? Big. 4. Say 4. Put your thumb down. Show them. Show the camera. Yeah, that man. What do you want to grow up and be? Grow up and be a woman. Well, that's highly probable. Did you have a kid? Love you. Gonna get your sister? Okay. The little one, right?
How many kids this guy got? Jeez.
That's one of the things about these like groups that distance themselves from everybody else is like they tend to have tons and tons of children. The FLDS are kind of like this too.
Yeah, it is. It's weird, but they do look pretty well kept. I haven't seen this for a while, so I was in a room and somebody was like said something that kind of irritated me, and I was like, yeah, I don't think that's quite how it went. Like I was like 10 when it happened, and the way they portrayed it was unbelievably like false, essentially, which is like understandable because they're gonna like, at least at that time, and the news, they're gonna like back up the cops and not want to like they're going to portray it that way, obviously. So I think, not so much now, maybe, but
I've always been a pretty hardcore anti-government guy. In fact, my forays into politics began with Ron Paul and Alex Jones. So I got the I guess WACO side, if you will, pretty early on. I've maintained basically the same views since I was a kid about WACO, so nothing's really changed. But it's just interesting because it's the exact opposite of how it would have been introduced to you guys.
say that again. The last part, what did you say?
I said it's just interesting because it's the exact opposite of how it would have been introduced to you guys.
Oh yeah. Like I know, like I find they're deviant from what Adventists teach in a lot of ways, but not that really matters anymore. It's not about that. It's about the truth. And they made it sound like they're a doomsday cult, and that's kind of true, I guess, but not in the sense that it makes people think it is. Like I don't think that they were wanting to actually die or whatever, like they made it sound like. Even towards the end, like when you listen to the way they're talking, and they were just like kind of one of those prepper type groups, it seems like to me. And then like the gun thing was like made up stuff, and then they had like legal firearm permits, and they sold it for like as a business, and they didn't have the weapons that they claimed they did, and illegal stuff. And he offered to let him come check it out, like before it happened and stuff. Like, I don't know what to make of that, what they were doing, but it's so interesting that I don't know much about it, so I don't like to say too much, but like I've heard a lot of that stuff about Clinton doing drug running and like people getting killed over it. And like his 3 personal bodyguards end up on that team that goes in that room, and they're the first ones to die. It's just kind of sketchy. But I'm not usually kind of up for the conspiracy thing, but it is kind of interesting. But I mean, they could have just been, I don't know how you'd set that up really to work out that way, but to have them killed, unless that's all a little hard to swallow, but it is interesting.
Well, and my personal feelings have always been, relatively conspiratorial, if I'm being honest. It seems like there's basically a trend in the 90s of the U.S. government kind of whacking people. And, maybe I'm just a little bit too, into my hardcore libertarian roots here, but like, I remember for like this is another example, Ruby Ridge, here in Idaho, with Randy Weaver, and he was supposed to be a doomsday prepper who was wanting to, cause a white revolution to overtake all the, minorities and all that stuff, and establish some kind of American fascism and blah blah blah. It's just all bogus. I mean, he is a racist, or at least he was a racist, but that's like, so what? They're like, some people smoke cigarettes. Like, what's your point? Not to compare them as necessarily analogous, but the point is like, so the guy had a flaw. That doesn't mean you kill his family. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and there was a couple, right? There was Waco, there was Ruby Ridge, there was the incident with the Michigan militia. There was the assassination of Americana. I kind of personally think there's a lot of weirdness around Tupac and his death, and it's all got the one thing in common, namely that it happened in the 90s. It's like, and so I don't know if it's conspiratorial in the sense that they like, like these people were insiders and knew something or something like that, but I think it's more just like a rogue government that had basically considered its opposition to be, kind of like bugs. You get rid of them.
Expendable.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I wouldn't put it past Clinton for 1 second, dude. Like all 3 of those guys in there. I mean, it's trippy. Like, I forget the stories now, but I know when he was like governor, he was like, there's really hard evidence that he was doing a drug running thing. And like some kid ended up seeing the plane exchange where they would do the plane drop thing. and that kid ends up being taken out. Some 14-year-old kid, they're just riding their bikes. Forget how that story goes, but that was kind of weird. But then to find out all the things Clinton's done, and it's like, that's the kind of thing you do in that situation. He's just totally thought he was untouchable.
Well, and the thing is too is like those are, when we talk about Waco and even Ruby Ridge, you're talking about things pretty popular, but even some of those ones that are less popular, like the assassination of Rabbi Meir Kahane, is just mind-boggling. This guy El Sayed Nasser, you know, I don't know how exactly to classify it, but he's a member of Al Qaeda. But I don't know if Al Qaeda is really a thing in 1990. So it's like proto Al Qaeda. But regardless, he's an Egyptian American, and he dresses up like a Orthodox Jew to go and shoot the rabbi in a New York hotel. There's actually a video of the rabbi like 5 minutes before, and I'm not even exaggerating. It's like literally he gives this 25 some odd minute long speech, and then the camera cuts out, and like 5 minutes later he's dead, which is just the eeriest thing. But this guy dresses like an Orthodox rabbi. He goes up, walks up, shakes his hand, and then shoots him, and then he runs out and kind of panics, finds nowhere to go, and just basically gets cornered. Right? He has one of those just freeze moments that people have when they don't really know what they're doing. They're freaking out, and fight didn't work, flight didn't work, so they just froze. Right? So they caught him. Is the point? They caught him. He has the gun. He has the residue on his hand. He's got the costume, all of it, right? And they let him go. He walks free. And eventually ends up being involved in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, of which there was only 4 perpetrators, by the way. So it's like, what are the odds? And then you have, information about Osama being, formerly a CIA trained agent so that the Mujahideen could take on the Russians in Afghanistan. And who does El Sayed Nasser work for? Osama bin Laden. And it almost seems like, at least to me, what happened is Kahane is kind of a nuisance, and one of these guys who happens to be getting military funding from America assassinates him. And America really doesn't want anybody to know that they're giving funding to these guys, and also they don't really care too much about Kahane dying, so they just kind of sweep it under the rug. Hey, we'll let him go. Doesn't really matter. You know what I mean? And then there's that's just one story, but then you got another one, Joe Vogler, the founder of the Alaskan Independence Party. He was supposed to give a speech in like 1992, I believe. Supposed to give a speech to the United Nations talking about why Alaska should be an independent country, and disappears. So obviously the speech doesn't happen. And then they find his body, and he's in a river tied up with a bullet to the back of his head, execution style. And they said it was a robbery gone wrong. Which is like, right, I'm sure it was. That's exactly how robbery's gone wrong. Your local mugging in New York, your friggin' mugger, like, has bungee cord and shoots the guy execution style who just so happens to be speaking at the United Nations in a week. And bear in mind too, the Alaskan Independence Party had a lot of power in the 90s. Like the governor Wally Hickel in Alaska was actually a member of the Alaskan Independence Party, and it was a legitimate idea. They could totally secede, become their own country. And then, I mean, you got all the sketchiness around Tupac's assassination, which that's, in my opinion, what it was, is an assassination, not just a murder. And I mean, just so on. You can go on, John F. Kennedy Jr., super weird circumstances surrounding his death. And yeah, the one thing these guys all have in common is they're in the 90s and they're enemies of the political regime that happened to be around in the 90s.
Yeah, that's just, I don't know what to make of that. I mean, it's just corruption, I would say. Like,
Oh yeah, it's true, right? I mean, it's funny because people, they often think like everything is like Kabbalistic, like the Illuminati and stuff like that. And that stuff exists for sure. I think that the head honchos in the Vatican are kind of a good example of that. They got their own nefarious goals, and they don't really care about collateral damage. But sometimes the cabal's a lot smaller, and the answer is a lot simpler. You know what I mean? A bad guy just got in control, and him and his cronies are now doing bad things, and it really is that simple. Clinton's one of those bad guys. Frankly, not to be too nonpartisan, but Bush is one of those bad guys also. People will do whatever they need to protect themselves and their political hacks. That's one of the things, actually. I'm no Trump fan by any stretch. In fact, I spent basically his entire administration pointing out all the things I didn't like about him and how he wasn't really a true conservative. But one of the things he did have kind of going for him is he pissed off all the elites. And so you knew that, maybe he was evil, but at least it was his evil. It wasn't like their collective evil. But what people kind of forget about that is, well, so did Clinton, and so did Bush for a minute too. And the point just kind of being okay, well, maybe there's different groups of elites, and we're all just like super naive, and so it just passes right by us. But these guys have their agenda, and those guys have their agenda, and they're conflicting with each other, and maybe they work with each other for a couple of years, maybe they don't. But in other words, maybe it looks a lot like it actually appears. You know what I mean? Like people say, oh, the Republicans and the Democrats are two heads of the same coin, but they appear to be fighting each other. Well, what if they appear to be fighting each other because they really don't like each other? It's a shocker, I know, but no.
Have you seen that document that compares the weird coincidences about JFK and Lincoln's assassinations? You seen that?
Yeah, I have.
It's really trippy.
Yeah, there's a real weird.
I forget some of it. I was trying to pull it up, but like their birthdays, their assassination dates, where the killer was from, where they were, and it's just one of them ran into a theater, one of them ran out when he shot him, and the dates are all trippy. So I don't know what to make of that, but it's weird. It's almost like it is almost like a spiritual manifestation in a sense, and it's also just our brains looking for patterns.
Well, I think both of those things are certainly, true to an extent. I think our brains like to find patterns because we're spiritual creatures. And really acts of the mind are kind of spiritual endeavors. You know what I mean? And this is going to be a tangent, but bear with me for a minute. I don't know if you've ever thought about music, right? But music is like magic, not like magic in a colloquial sense, but if you look at the dictionary definition of magic, music is pretty close to that, right? We put together a whole bunch of random chants and sounds and instruments and stuff like that, and they go in this kind of set order, and it creates this melody that's capable of getting an entire crowd of people to become entirely debased or become incredibly emotional or start fighting each other in the form of a mosh pit or riot or change their political opinions on a dime or all this kind of stuff. It's like mass brainwashing, mass hallucination. It's all this big, giant, elaborate magic trick that no other species on the planet can do, but we can do it. And we can do it well, and we can do it intricately in such a way that you could listen to your favorite song over and over and over and over and over again, but get a really nice pair of headphones and listen to it for the 1,000th time, and all of a sudden you're hearing new sounds that you didn't even know existed, let alone existed within this song. You know what I mean? And it's all just, like I said, like this big, giant magic trick, kind of. And everything that we do is kind of like that. Philosophy and economy, writing books. It's not sorcery proper, but it is very magical. And I think there's a reason for that kind of magical quality to it. It's that these are all spiritual kind of experiences. There's only one other being besides us that creates stuff, right? And that's God. God is the original music maker. God's the original architect. God's the original story writer. All the different things that we do because we're made in his image. And so when we feel these like magical or spiritual kind of experiences, you know what I mean? I think that it's actually because like they genuinely are kind of magical spiritual experiences. Well, I'll take that back to this like necessity that we have to find patterns, you know what I mean? Whether that's in the form of something like the um, Lincoln assassination, or there's things like the Mandela effect. Um, People looking at like images in the stars, and they think that it's like a horse or whatever else the zodiac is. Um, it's not that it's always true. Like, for example, most of those stars don't look anything like what we think they look like. I mean, like some of those things are just like trapezoids, and for some reason that trapezoid is a rhinoceros, and that just doesn't make any sense. And I'm being facetious, but you get the idea, right? But the fact that we want it to make sense as some kind of image kind of is a sort of spiritual manifestation in its own right, because we're so used to there being patterns everywhere and to everything being set up in a nice set kind of logical order that also has this sense of magic and mystery to it, like simultaneously, almost contradictorily. We're so used to that being the case that when it's not the case, we still really want it to be the case. You know what I mean? And so our brains make up stuff like faces on Mars and etc. I don't know. I'm ranting, but that's actually
Well, yeah, and it's when you start throwing in like God, knowing everything ahead of time or whatever you want to say. It's kind of like Chuck Missler used to say, like, with God, you can't have coincidences. Like, and the deeper you think about that, the more true you realize that is, like, or that it would seem to be. Like, but the question is, like, what if God intended for you to see that pattern? It's like, no, you shouldn't really be so sure to say that. But at the same time, it's like, if you knew it was going to be like that, like, are these like circumstantial? Is it a mistake to see a pattern, or is it, it's like a weird question. I don't know how to articulate it very well, but that is, if you knew you're going to see a pattern, like, what's your duty to like notice that it's not really a pattern? You know what I mean? Like, it gets tricky.
Yeah, no, I definitely know what you mean.
Did you determine that I see a pattern that looks like a pattern that's not a real pattern? Or like, whether you determined it or not, but you know what I mean? Like, it's almost worse on determinism in a sense, because it's like, what's the point of it? Like he knew it, and I determined to see it, but then I'm determined. I feel like compelled to affirm or something that has some meaning, but then it's not really a pattern. It's like, how do you get out of that? You know what I mean? Like, no matter what, how you look at, providence or whatever. But yeah, it's interesting. Like, we were talking to, who was there talking about? Oh, Richard earlier. He was like, what did he say? That was funny. And I tend to have the same sense. Like, free will is when you refrain from something, like when you want to do something and you refrain from it. I think that does has a little deeper feel to it, right? I mean, because if you feel compelled to do something and you restrain yourself from doing it, it's kind of an interesting thing, or like deliberate. I like to say deliberation or whatever, if it's a thing, It seems like if you make it too much of an equation, it becomes like its equation's too flat. It's like, I remember listening to R.C. Sproul, and he said, "Oh no, free will exists. You just do what you most desire, what your will is to do," and that seems right. But at the same time, it seems like if you've ever been a drug addict or whatever, you like think, and you like didn't give into it, and you wanted to really bad, and you're fighting it, and then you don't. It doesn't. There's a sense that seems to me like your greatest will really was to do it, and you don't do it. You know what I mean? But I mean, you can still look at it that way, like he said. But like, how do you look at that?
I'm not 100% sure. I do think that deliberation is kind of in that same category of things I was just talking about, where it's like kind of, it's almost like a semi-magical experience in its own right.
Yeah.
But
At the end of the day, you still, it's like choose one way, and in some sense, if you overcome it, that was still your ultimate will or whatever, right? I mean, the past comes down in a single line, essentially. What is will be, or what will be will be.
yeah, and I don't know. The weird thing about it is, like, because there's a lot of questions you can ask. Like, for example, with something that's not necessarily physically addictive, but is addictive in almost like at an essence level, like pornography, right? Where, I mean, let's just be honest. Everything that is within you as a male, until you are in your 60s and probably even beyond that, is just dead set on a pair of boobs. I mean, if we're just being honest and blunt with it, right? Um, and that kind of, with the weird thing about those kinds of addictions is, it's not like you're getting sick because you didn't get your fix. You know what I mean? It's more like your mood is just out of whack, I guess. Your funk is off, so to speak. You've messed up the emperor's groove, right? But then you shouldn't be doing it, so then you do it, and it kind of just messes with your groove even further. And so you're stuck here in a situation where, like, your body's not forcing you to do something and your will wants you not to do it, and yet you're doing it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like, that's
Romans 4 or whatever it is. What is it, 6? I mean,
where he says, that which I will, I do not, and that which I do, I will not. Yeah.
That's really complicated. Like the way he says it, it's really funny.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you can fly. It's easy to follow, I guess. But man, Romans it's amazing. That book, like, I'd love to know exactly what he was answering when he wrote that letter.
It seems like a combination of things, to be honest. Like, it almost seems like a lot of times that's like Paul is writing to a church that is, I don't know if this is always the case, but it seems like in a lot of those letters, Paul is writing to a church that just sort of like clunked its head on an issue, and as a result, there's like 40 issues deriving from this one issue. You know what I mean? Like the Corinthian church's issue is that they just have no sense of morality, but because they have no sense of morality, they have to talk about stuff like, all right, is it okay to marry, and when is it okay to marry, and is it okay to marry your mom, and you know what I mean, all this other kind of stuff. And it's like, they're all related, but
yeah. I've just been thinking lately, like looking at the whole law question more closely, and like looking at Galatians and Romans. Like you could take parts of Romans and just like show clearly that Paul is saying, like, the law's done away with, and then supplement it with Galatians, but then you could take like a select other half of Romans and throw away the rest, and it would sound like he's absolutely saying the law's fully intact. I mean, it's weird how it's you got to like read it all the way through to really get your head around it. It seems to me, and people come to some very different conclusions from it. I think you can people will take it and then try to make the law of Christ, which is different, I think, than the law of God, and obviously in some sense, it seems to me anyway. Otherwise, he would have just called it the same thing. But yeah, I think it's. Have you heard of the whole thing that you can get from Exodus and Deuteronomy with the blue stone or the sapphire tablets? Have you heard that before? Like the 10 Commandments were originally written on sapphire stone.
Well, I think I know where somebody might be making the reference, because in the breastplate of the sons of Aaron, they have a precious stone, 12 different kinds of precious stone, one for each of the for each of the tribes, right? And so what they would do is they take this precious stone and they'd have 3 rows of 4 going, horizontally down, and each of these stones, which the high priest would carry upon his chest, would have engraved in it the name of one of the 12 tribes. With Joseph, I think, if I remember correctly, being no, sorry, I don't remember correctly. Joseph isn't connected into 2 because Manasseh and Ephraim are both considered the half tribes of Joseph. But that's not what happens here. What happens here is that Levi is not counted because they're the priestly caste. And so you have, instead of, and that's real quickly just to note that that's something you always kind of have to remember when you're talking about Israel. Sometimes the 12 tribes can refer to the 12 original brothers, in which case Ephraim and Manasseh are being counted as one tribe, which is Joseph, and also Levi's being counted. But sometimes Levi's not counted because of its priestly status, and when that is the case, Joseph is split into Ephraim and Manasseh. But I digress on that. So they got these engravings in the precious stones that are on the breastplate, and then the priest would wear that breastplate around, because it'd be like he was carrying the burden of Israel and their iniquities and all that on himself.
Yeah. Check out what this guy says. This is brilliant. Hey, Mike, what's up, man? What are you burning over there?
Oh, my free steak I got from across the street, Christian church.
You know Mike, right?
Yes, I do.
CJ, how are you? I just wanted to jump in. I'm going to go back out to chat so I don't get stuck in you guys' 4-hour conversation. I just want to let you know, I heard this guy talk, and he was pointing out in Colossians, is that New Testament?
Yes,
Colossians,
sir.
Corinthians, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians. Is there a 1 Colossians, 2 Colossians?
No, sir. So just the 1st and 2 Corinthians, but they are all 3 Old Testament or New Testament, excuse me. Colossians.
The first and second Corinthians. He was teaching something completely different. So it would take me some time to look for it. But I got to throw this out there because you guys may have seen this. He like I say, in a 3-hour teaching, he just said this in passing, that 2 Corinthians is proven to be before 1 Corinthians, and so it's actually broken into 2. So there's actually essentially 3 Corinthians, and that if there's, like, for instance, in 1 Corinthians, I think it was 5, he says how he speaks of the letter that you wrote to me, or the letter I wrote to you, or whatever. You know how we always talk about we don't have the other side of Paul's letters? He made it sound like 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians was both that whole connection put all together, and we have all the letters that they sent and the response that he's giving to them. And I wondered if you guys ever heard that, or maybe I could, like, search it out for you and try to see what he's talking about.
I have actually. So where the reference comes from, it's just like you were saying, the Paul's references to his severe letter, which, to the best of our knowledge, we don't have the severe letter. But some people, which is probably one of the people who you were hearing, some people take the position that we do actually have the severe letter, and that it's a part of 2 Corinthians. I personally don't agree with it. I think the severe letter has been lost to history for whatever reason. I don't really know, but I think the short and sweet of it is God didn't consider it to be scripture. But it does appear to me that that's the more likely answer. That being said, though, I'm not like an expert on this by any stretch. You know what I mean? No,
yeah, because he didn't mention that specific word. And quite honestly, I think I'll take some time just to look it up. Like I say, just off the top of my head, it sounded like 1 Corinthians 4 or something that was referring to this letter, and that he knew by that you could switch the 1 Corinthians 1 and 2, and that the one was actually mixed up. So yeah, if you guys got an interest in that, I'll go back to him, and like I say, I'd have to scroll through a 3-hour teaching to find it, but I'm willing to do that, brothers, if you're willing to, like, check it out with me once I find it. No, I mean, not tonight. Goodness.
Yeah, sure, man. That'd be awesome.
Yeah. All right, I'm getting back to the other chat room.
All right.
So like I said, I don't get stuck in. Anyway, good to see you. Good to see y'all. Carry on. Carry on.
All right.
Yeah, have a good night, man.
So I want to this isn't very long. It's just a short clip. I want to show you and just see what you make of this. It's nothing, no new revelation. It's kind of an interesting little factoid about the 10 Commandments that a lot of people don't actually pick up on regarding like just some details. And I think it's Exodus 24. I was going to pull it up, but this guy kind of gets the ball rolling on the conversation. That just kind of cool.
Class last week that the 10 Commandments are written on sapphire. So let's go through the evidence of why I said that. And we'll start with 10 Commandments written on sapphire, Exodus chapter 24, verse 9 and 10. Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel went up, and they saw the God of Israel. Under his feet was something like a pavement made of sapphire, clear as the sky itself. 2 verses later, the Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and stay here, and I will give you the tablets of the stone with the law and commands that I've written in their instruction." What stone? If you contextually look, the only stone mentioned in the context and the setting was the stone of sapphire. Well, let's make it, see if we can't tighten that up. Numbers chapter 15, 37 through 39. Again, the Lord spoke to Moses. "Speak to the children of Israel. Tell them to make tassels on the corner of their garments throughout their generations, and to put blue thread in the tassels of the corner. And you shall have the tassels with the blue thread, that you may look upon and remember all the commandments of the Lord." Well, why was the thread of blue to remind them of the commandments? Because the commandments are written on blue stone, the sapphire. It's let's go maybe tighten it up a little more. Revelation 17, 1 through 5. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and talked to me, saying, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot, who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication." So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Now notice this: the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls on her head, and mystery of Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots, the abomination of the earth. Now, I just wanted you to notice the colors of the woman, the harlot. And the colors were scarlet, purple, and gold. Now we're going to look at the high priest. Here's the high priest. This is Exodus 28, 5 and 6. "They shall take the gold, blue, purple, and scarlet thread and fine linen, and shall make an ephod of gold, blue, purple, and scarlet thread, and fine woven linen artistically." So what color does the harlot not have that the high priest does have? Blue, which means the false church rejects the law of God, which is the law of love, which is the design protocols. The high priest now wore a breastplate with 12 stones on it. Symbolically, what did the breastplate with 12 stones represent? The 12 stones represented the 12 tribes, and symbolically, the 12 tribes represented the peoples of the earth. And where did the breastplate get worn? On the breast or the chest. So it symbolically says, the peoples of the earth are tied to my heart. That's what it said. Now, what do you think the breastplate was tied to the high priest's garments with? Well, I'll read it to you. Exodus 28, 28. "They shall bind the breastplate by means of its ring to the rings of the ephod, using a blue cord, so that it is above the intricately woven band." What does the blue cord represent? The law of God, or the law of love, his designs for life. And so I read this out of the book called Desire of Ages, page 329. "The yoke that binds to service is the law of God, the great law of love revealed in Eden, proclaimed upon Sinai, and in the new covenant written on the heart, is that which binds the human worker to the will of God." So, false religions of the world including false Christianity, deny God's design law of love. They don't deny the Ten Commandments as a system of rules functioning like human law, but they deny the design elements or aspects of it. Thus, they teach religious obligations, ceremonies, rituals at the expense of loving people. Thus, they're represented by the harlot without the blue thread. So how this might look?
I think that's a little bit of a stretch. I don't know. Maybe. But I think it's interesting. I think if you look at different versions, I was watching this other thing. I found it really interesting. I've heard people talk about it before, but like God coming down, like his throne comes down. It says like it sounds like it's like physical. You know what I mean? It's just kind of interesting. Like it describes the pillar of smoke coming down onto Sinai where Moses is. Like, can you imagine like how cool that is? Like, what that look like?
Yeah, actually, kind of a similar thing. One of my favorite scenes in any movie is in The Prince of Egypt, when the pillar of fire is in between the Egyptians and the Israelites right before they're about to cross the Red Sea. And obviously, that's just a cartoon, but like they do a really good job, kind of. Excuse me, trying to show like the power.
I got to see that. Is that like a cartoon movie or is that an actual movie? I haven't seen it, I guess.
It is a cartoon movie, DreamWorks, 1998. I think it's DreamWorks' first movie, but it might be second, right after Ants, which is terrible, by the way. If you've never seen it,
I think I saw that one maybe a long time ago.
I'm a big DreamWorks fan, and I think Ants is just one of the most awful movies I've ever seen.
I think that's when it started going bad. I gotta see that Prince of Egypt though. Everyone's been talking about it. What was I gonna say? The Blue Stone thing. It's kind of cool because I'm pretty sure it says like when he said I saw this on another thing I was watching, and it was like it says he takes the tablets out of the stone. Like it's a definite article that doesn't have to be there, I guess. And it is interesting that like when you look at if you like do a word study like in eSword I was doing that the other day too. I like, just typed in anywhere in the whole Bible it talks about the throne, and there's a lot of like symbolic references of like the throne of God and Jesus sitting on the throne, and like how the or like language about his scepter and the foundation of his throne and stuff like that, which is kind of like metaphoric language. But I think it kind of ties it to that, like because like whenever it talks about the foundation or it says it in some different ways, I think, in different versions of the Bible. So like you can kind of make the connection with the same word in the Hebrew or whatever. It'll say like, what does it say? Like it'll use like a phrase like that, at least to me always sounded like more like something that's not necessarily trying to suggest like it being like, you know, like when you think of foundation, you think of it being like a strong thing that something's built on, or if it's not strong, then it's weak, it's something bad. And it's like a bad foundation is like your house, you know, like house built on the sand. So like sometimes it'll translate it like under the feet. And that phrase, I think that maybe in the English, like be a phrase that comes up under different words being employed or whatever, like in the sense of like, you know, I can think of other times that's employed in the English. It's probably a different word, like ashes under your feet or whatever. But like sometimes that you don't get the, I got to look at it closer, but you don't get the impression that it's trying to establish the idea that it's like a firm foundation or whatever. But I know like in some of the verses about like the foundation of your throne is righteousness or justice and righteousness or whatever. And it seems to like associate God's throne with the foundation of his throne. And then it's probably based on this thing I'm talking about in Exodus 24, where like you even lose that it's blue. I think if you look at like the NASB, they actually say it's blue, and then like lapis lazuli and all that. I don't know if that's a different thing, but sapphire. I don't think lapis lazuli is sapphire, but I'm not really sure there. I know that's mentioned in the Bible, but what was I gonna say? Like, because it also kind of says it's clear. So like whenever you see pictures of like God's throne, it seems like it's saying it's like emanating with light. But technically it says it's blue, I guess. It's kind of cool. But of course, those tablets get broken, right? When he comes down the mountain, he throws them down or whatever.
Right.
I didn't watch Nicholas's thing, but I think he messed that up. Like, I forget what he was trying to say or whatever. But I think he corrected it or whatever. So, but it says like that. It says, a bunch of people keep telling me that Moses wrote the second pair, but I think it just says that God tells Moses to cut out tablets like blank, and then he says, bring them to me, and then he writes them on there again like he did the first time. But what is it that people, because I think it's easy to mix up and you think that there's a different words on it a different time. I forget. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, there's a reference to another set of laws, and people mix that up with the Decalogue a lot.
I remember
I don't know.
reading
I
through
think people personally, I think people do way too much reading into like this element of the law is set apart from. I don't know. To me, it all seems like it's a very straightforward kind of thing. Like when we say things like ceremonial law and moral law, what we're really doing is making, in my opinion, is making outside distinctions for the sake of making what happened make more sense, right? So, for example, when we talk about a ceremonial law as distinguished from a moral law, what we're doing is trying to describe from an outsider's perspective why it is that Canaan is held accountable for committing acts of incest and sacrificing their mother's children, but not held accountable for not holding a Passover, right? But that distinction doesn't exist in the Bible. It's a distinction that we make to try and make sense of certain things that happen in and around the law in the Bible, right? But I think as far as the Jews are concerned, though, I think it's all one giant cohesive unit. They count 613 mitzvot. I don't know if that's true or false, but
wait, you think Canaan would be judged for the sin of not keeping the Passover?
no, that's what I mean is when we say stuff like ceremonial law, that's what we're doing is we're trying to, as 21st century Americans, right, in our context, we're basically trying to communicate to everybody, hey, this is a way we can distinguish this group of laws, which does seem to apply universally, versus this group of laws, which doesn't seem to apply universally, right? And so we'll call Passover law ceremonial because what we're trying to say is it applies specifically to the Jews. But within the law itself, that distinction isn't actually made. That's a distinction that helps us later on, right? It helps us understand why Passover is for the Jews only, but Canaan can be held accountable for all the sexual sin, even though it's the same law, right? But within the law itself, meaning from the Jewish perspective, I don't see that distinction. I think it's just one big unit for them of the 613 mitzvot. And I don't think the 10 is in any way separated from. In fact, if you think of some of the things that are taken most seriously in the law, Passover is included, Yom Kippur is included, not sacrificing children unto Moloch is included, kosher laws are included. None of those are in the Ten Commandments. And I think the reason why is because from the Jewish perspective, that's kind of arbitrary, right? Like it seems to me like this is all a unit of law, and there are certain elements that can be highlighted for various reasons that are helpful to us. But as far as the law itself, those separations and unitisms, if you will, I don't think they actually exist.
Yeah, I would say in a sense that's true. I mean, like to a Jewish person, like especially if like it's what all of it's what God said for you to do or whatever. And so in that sense, in that sense, anything God intends for you to do that you don't would be immoral in some sense, like because you're not listening to God. I would say that's true, but I do think here's the reasons why I would say that it's there's a separation that's implied by the text. Like those were the ones God both times insisted that he write, and that he spoke it to them, or and that they like said, like they got freaked out, and like, and then there's that one verse where it says they're the words of the covenant, let's say, probably because God spoke them, and there's like 10 words or whatever, and then he places those inside the ark, which I think has some sort of significance that should be seen there, like the ones he wrote and spoke out loud that they agreed to, and like there's verses where it says God won't change what he speaks or whatever, which is specific, I would say. And then also but I agree, like Paul obviously uses the law. He has the whole, like, whatever God said is the law, right? Like that's like a more simple way to look at it. Like whatever God tells for you to do, that he intends for you to do, is going to be moral to, because if you go to think to do it or not, and then you don't, God wants you to, that's would be an immoral act in that sense. It's just like, I asked this to Kelby too. You probably didn't hear this, but this is the thing that, so if we say if we agree the law like never saved somebody, right? And the way Paul talks about it, like it was only given to the covenant people, however you want to look at that. But let's say when he says it was given to us, like, is he talking to just like, do you read that to say, to me, when I hear Paul say it was given to us, I think he's saying Israel, the covenant people, the people that were under the first covenant that received the law in Sinai. So when he says like the law was given to us as a schoolmaster to see that we needed to come to God for, to be saved, let's say. He doesn't say that particularly, but that's kind of the idea, right? Like, so like, I was thinking about that, and I was just wondering, like, when he says it, like, if that's the case, like, is that in itself saying in some way he's doing away with it, or is he saying, in other words, if it didn't save you before, why would it lose its value in the new covenant? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, did they have to do it before to be saved, sort of thing? In a sense they did, I guess. But like, ultimately it was supposed to be fulfilled in Christ, whatever that means. And so I just think, like, it seems to me he's saying, or I would wonder what would be bad about it if it never saved anybody anyway. And in a sense, he's actually saying it is still doing that function, because it should still be driving people to repentance or whatever. If it's a mirror to show you how bad you are a sinner or whatever. What do you make of that thinking? You see something wrong with that?
Well, I don't. For me, I guess one of the big things that I kind of want to point out with it is that I don't see it as like, I don't see a issue with a quote change that doesn't actually have change in root. And so, like, what I mean by that is, if it appears that beforehand the law was salvific and after it wasn't, but dig under the surface and it turns out the law was never salvific, I don't see so much of an issue with that, because it seems to me like um, the point of the law's rigidity is in order to demonstrate that it can't be kept, right? I give the famous example all the time of Jesus talking of, looking upon another woman with lust. Jesus wrote with his own finger that to commit adultery was a penalty worthy of death in the Ten Commandments. And then he spoke with his own lips that to even look upon another woman with lust was to commit adultery. And so, put the pieces together. God said as clearly and directly and personally as anything has ever been said by him, that to look upon another woman with lust was to do something that was deserving of being stoned to death and then being cast into hellfire. That's pretty brutal, right? It also effectively eliminates basically everybody who's ever existed. With the exception of like small children and people who are so handicapped that such a thing has never occurred to them. And to an extent, I think that's the point, right? Like, I think, oh, that was weird. Sorry, my My technology just kind of turned off and on for no reason.
The piano, it sounded like.
This is an Xbox, actually.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
Did you ever play Fusion Frenzy? Have you heard of that game?
not by name.
I think it came out when the original Xbox came out, but it's really fun. Do you play online with Xbox, or how does that work?
Not with Xbox. No, I play online computer games, like Total War. I'll play that online a lot. But
We should play Fusion Frenzy. You should see how that would work if we could play it online, because it'd be a fun game to play with. Like, it's like you little guys running around. It's almost like American Gladiators, and it's like you play like a 8-10. There's like, tons of little mini games, and your character runs around. I think you can have at least 4 people playing at once, and like it's almost like American Gladiators, like all these different kinds of games where you have to like. It's hard to explain. Just check it out though. I think it was one of the released games with the original Xbox. But it was a really fun like party game. I remember playing that. That was cool. Also, like one of my favorite multiplayer games was on Super Nintendo. I think you could get this thing where you could have 4 players, or like extended it to 4 players or whatever. Back in the day when it was really, you just had 2 original controllers. But it was just like a bird's eye view, right? 2-dimensional, but it's kind of 3-dimensional. But you run around, you all start 4 corners on a little square screen that just stays the same, and you like set bombs out and run away from them, and then they explode, and you try to be the last man standing. I love those kind of games. It's kind of cheesy, I guess, but good gameplay, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. I'd be down to check it out, definitely. I like a lot of strategy, so even cheesy strategy is fun.
Yeah, for sure. I used to like. Have you ever heard of the board game Stratego?
Yeah,
that's fun. We should play that.
Yeah, those are my personal favorite kind of games.
Yeah, me too.
My favorite computer game in particular is Total War, and then as far as like games that are like phone games, for example, I play tons of Go, tons of chess, tons of poker, because I like the mental aspect of it. You
have an account on chess.com?
Probably, to be honest with you, because I'm pretty sure
we could play each other. I'm not very good, but
that's okay. I stopped playing for a long time, so I'm not particularly great either.
I couldn't get over 1,000, to be honest, but I pretty much only played like 1-minute blitz games or whatever they're called. It's really competitive, and it gets frustrating.
It's one that you actually might really like if you like strategy games is Go. Go. It's a Chinese board game.
I've never learned how to play it, but I think I might.
Very simple and yet also very difficult. Because the idea is you place your stones on the board, and then there's the white stones and the black stones, and whoever ends the game with the most stones on the board, which is set up in a grid form, wins. And the catch that makes everything kind of difficult is if you can surround another stone on all 4 of its quadrants, then that stone gets removed and you collect it. So it's almost like, you jump a piece in checkers, you move to the same spot as a piece in chess. Well, in Go, you have a stone surrounded on all 4 quadrants. And that limits where you can put them, because of course if you have a stone already being quadranted out, or an area already being quadranted out, then you can't put a stone there, right? But then also there's the fact that I had 10 stones, and then you went and surrounded these stones, and now I only have 8. And that's the other thing that makes it really kind of hard, is you forget sometimes that you have 3 stones in a row. And so you kind of think to yourself, oh yeah, no, I'm good. They can't get the quadrants right, except they can quadrant those 3 stones because they're in a row, right? And then you lose all 3 stones at once. And it's
I gotta check that out. Yeah, I gotta learn that game. It sounds like my kind of game.
Oh yeah, it's an absolute blast. I love it. I'm terrible at it, but I love it.
There's got to be like an app where you can play your friends over the computer or something, right? I would think.
Yeah, I usually play the computer on my app. I don't know if it'd allow me to play friends. I imagine it would. I've never tried though.
Yes, if you find an app that you can do that on, that's like the chess.com's like that. But yeah, let me know if you have a chess.com. I think mine's just my real name, Jamie Ranking or whatever. So you could search me out and send me a thing, and it'll notify me if you get on there. You can join for free to play for free like that. You just can't get all the options because it'll like you can when you pay the thing, it'll like it has so many good teaching things for chess on there, like different things to practice and then take lessons and learn strategy, and really really well designed thing. I was paying a little bit for a while. I just kind of got bored with it. I also do like that. I think Chris Date joined it after I told him he should. I told a bunch of people to do it. I probably sent you a thing too, but he mentioned like his standing or whatever. But it's called Elevate. Have you heard of that?
I don't think I have.
It's just like one of those brain things where you like there's spelling, math, reading comprehension, and memory. And I wonder if I could. I think I set my phone up. I got to show you this. It's cool. But Chris is like, I think he got on there too, and it's just kind of fun because it gets harder and harder, and you get I forget. I might just buy it for you just for fun, but since you're a brainy guy, yeah, they did just updated it. But I'll do it another time. But the what was I going to tell you? Oh yeah, you know that I'm going to try to get that Rob Reed guy that's around in different channels because he's a lawyer. You know who that is?
Yeah.
I want to talk to him and listen to that thing, at least the first chapter of it, because it's really interesting. And I wanted you to come too, and anybody who wants to actually. But I'd be curious because I think you're gonna end up. Mike watched. I think I put videos on it or put it out the first 2 chapters on my channel, but I'd be curious. I think you'd end up agreeing with it because it's. I did find it. I think I just found it stimulating because it was some of the things I could have. I think I could have found myself agreeing with the guy who is the guy who made the bill for the National Sunday Law thing. Some of the arguments he made were actually something I could have found myself agreeing with under a different subject. And I thought when I heard some of the arguments, I just hadn't thought about it. It was just kind of new ideas that I didn't realize like may have been a wrong way to think about it. I think you probably would agree with it now that I understand it better, but it is really interesting how some of the conversation that it goes or whatever. I guess I could play it really quick, like a few minutes of it or something, but I don't know. I'm getting pretty tired. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I'm pretty exhausted.
I'll just plan it ahead of time, see if we can do it that way.
Yeah, I will say just as a little preempt. I'm very much a theonomist in a personal sense, but in an actual political sense, I'm very far from it. So, like for example, in the form of like blue laws, I get very, very queasy about the state legislating anything for any theological reason.
Did I tell you what happened to me the other day?
Are you talking about with praise?
Yeah. Sorry, continue.
Well, and basically my thing is, I don't mean to insult people who disagree with me, but it's going to sound that way. I've done enough historical reading to know that just because the right guys have power doesn't mean that the system all of a sudden works. If the system's flawed, the system's flawed, and that's just the way it is. And when Martin Luther, great hero of the Protestant Reformation, also advocated for the slaughter of peasants, advocated for the extremely brutal treatment of Jews, advocated for fighting against the Anabaptists, which both of us would be descendants of the Anabaptists. Anybody who does believer's baptism would be ultimately a descendant, theologically speaking, of the Anabaptists, at least in some way, because that was the big point, was you only baptize believers. But especially you too, because of the fact that you're a Seventh-day Adventist. That's like the Seventh-day Adventists, the Amish, and the Mennonites are almost like the most direct to the Anabaptist you can get.
Church of Christ too, I think. Right? Like
Yeah, that's
Assembly
true.
of God or whatever, Church of God or whatever it is.
Yeah, and I love Luther. I expect to meet Luther in heaven one day as a brother in Christ, and he's going to be able to look back at all the naughty things that I did, and we'll be able to have a laugh about it because it won't be harmful anymore. But the fact of the matter is, with the power of the state with him, Luther is just as evil as anybody else, and anybody who's going to put, somebody in jail because they blasphemed God or because they didn't honor a certain holy day or because they're a Taoist rather than a Christian, well, eventually they're not going to like the fact that you're a certain kind of Christian, right?
Well, what about gay marriage?
Say again?
What about gay marriage then?
Well, for me, I don't think the state should be involved in marriage. I think that is a decision between the consenting parties and the community at large. If a gay couple can find a church that will recognize their marriage, then the state has no business telling them that they're not married.
But that's kind of how it goes anyway, isn't it?
That's how it went before. Before we had Bergefeld, that was the law of the land. And so, like, for example, the Presbyterian Church would willingly marry gays, and so, if they did that, then that would mean that they had a legally recognized marriage. And I obviously don't agree with gay marriage, but that's the price that I think I have to pay in order to get the state out of marriage in general, which is what I think should be the case. Like, I think it's ridiculous that I, as a heterosexual male, have to go get a marriage license. That's absurd to me. I have to ask the state permission to marry my wife. You know what I mean? That's between me, her, and the church. That has nothing to do with the government. And yeah, I mean, it gets dicey when you're talking about, like, okay, is that a conservative position or not? I think it is. I think it's in line with our Constitution. Yeah. I think it's in line with Burkean style conservatism. And the other thing about it too that people got to remember is, like, look, you can put a hooker in a hijab, but she's still a hooker, right? And what I mean by that is, you can force somebody into something, but unless you change what the society actually believes and feels, you're not doing anything. Sometimes the crime is so great that you prosecute it anyway. For example, if you have a murderous society, they're going to be murderous regardless of if you have the law, but you prosecute it anyway because murder is just that bad. But the reason the hooker and the hijab analogy, if you want to call it that, works so well is because booty shorts are not such a tremendous crime that you have to start stoning women who wear them. But if you're going to start stoning women who wear booty shorts, it's not like you changed anything about the way that they actually, like, believe and value themselves and value the men around them. You just scared them essentially into doing what you wish. And that's not okay, right?
Yeah, I don't think God works that way either. I think that would be miserable.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And in fact, on that exact same, topic, trust me, there is nobody as harsh on the sexualization of women as yours truly. In fact, a lot of the women in my day-to-day lives, they it's either love or hate. They either really like the stuff that I have to say because they feel like nobody else actually sticks up for women's actual value, or they think that I'm an oppressive dirtbag, right? But the point is just to say, like, I think booty shorts are not acceptable ever for any reason. It was saved for you and your spouse doing freaky stuff when the lights are off. And I'm not even joking, honestly. Like, I'm saying it in a comedic manner, but I'm not kidding. Like, that's what those things are used for. I don't think it's good for women to be outside in bikinis. I think the idea that the yoga pants and leggings are acceptable in day-to-day life is just absurd. That being said, though, it's not the state's job. That's between that woman, her spouse, her father, depending on who is the male authority in her life, right? And God has nothing to do with the state.
Yeah, that's the right position. it's not your. It's like it's a moral issue that the state can't do it, and then so like you can't make a law for it, but you can teach it as a principle or whatever, and just that's just the world.
Yeah, exactly. And one of my personal principles is, if society would not be improved by a law, then it shouldn't exist, right? Now, that to an extent, this is sometimes going to come down to differences in what people mean by improved. I think punishment of evil is in and of itself a good thing. So, if you have punishment for murder that doesn't necessarily dissuade people from being murderers, that's not really the point, in my opinion. The point is that you're punishing murderers, and that's a net positive.
Yeah, but what about what system or what theory of justice is that? Like,
oh, penal. My theory of justice is 1,000% penal. I think the law exists to punish wrongdoing. Rehabilitation is a nice perk if it happens, and dissuasion is a nice perk if it happens. But the point of a penal system is to punish wrongdoing, in my opinion.
yeah. What about there's also the aspect of deterrency or whatever, deterrent.
I think deterrence is secondary ultimately. Don't get me wrong, as much as I would really like to reduce certain levels of crime, I don't think that's the state's job. And I'll give you actually a really good example of this. Human trafficking is obviously an absolutely egregious sin, right? And if I were to say something like human trafficking or human traffickers, should be executed, you could look at that in any of those three potential ways, right? It's clearly not rehabilitative because they're dead. You can't rehabilitate somebody who's dead. Does it work as a deterrent? Well, maybe. It could be persuasive. It could be that some people don't value the money as much as they value their lives. But ultimately, that's not why I said the kidnapper should be executed. I said the kidnapper should be executed because kidnapping is evil, and that's what I think is a proper punishment to give to somebody who traffics in a human being. And that, in my opinion, should be the primary motivation of the law, which is a big part of the reason also why I disagree with so many laws. For example, marijuana law. I don't believe it's the state's job to punish somebody who is committing at most a crime against themselves in their own mind. You know what I mean? And so it's like, even though my theory of justice is incredibly harsh, my harsh theory of justice also kind of limits me to what I can say should and shouldn't be a crime. Because I'm not interested in deterring you from drug use. I'm interested in punishing things that are wrong. And so at that point, I have to ask myself the question, is drug use so great of a moral wrong that I think it should be punished? And I don't, at least not by me.
What about heroin? Should it be banned? I'm sympathetic to your position here on all drugs, in fact, but I'm not sure about it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, the argument you have in favor for banning heroin is the net impact on a society can be so great that you reasonably expect victimization of third parties. I don't hate
it's
that
almost
argument.
like so bad. It seems to me like it's almost so bad that like you just got to outlaw it. But at the same time, like I'm sympathetic to like the same argument for marijuana, which I think is, yeah, I'm not sure. Even on the marijuana thing, like I do think it's ridiculous. But yeah, I don't know. I'm pulled it in two ways, but I do think I would vote to make it legal. I think, but not heroin. That's at least where I feel like right now, anyways. But I feel like that's inconsistent.
See, it might be. It depends on how exactly you go about it. So first off, I'll say plainly, I disagree with all federal drug laws on principle. The federal government has no business creating laws regulating substances. That's the state. If the state wants to do that, that's a different conversation, I think. But the federal government, I just don't think has the right to do that. Now, getting down to the individual state government, then you ask the question, okay, well, should Idaho make heroin illegal? And I can see the arguments for both sides, because the argument for no is kind of the same argument as pot, which is this really something that is deserving of punishment? There's also, of course, the question of should somebody be incarcerated for a crime against themselves, which I think it's hard to argue that they should. I don't. To me, it seems. I mean, even when you find somebody who's like drunken disorderly, for example, or gets a DUI, the harm done to themselves via drinking is not actually what the crime is, right? The crime is the potential harm to society by being drunk in public or by getting behind the wheel. And so, thinking of it from that perspective, it does seem like crimes against oneself should not be considered crimes in the legal sense. The argument against that is that with certain drugs, it can be reasonably argued that the effects of the drug are such that victimization of certain element or certain people within society is basically a feature and not a bug, right? In other words, if it can be reasonably expected that a heroin user will indeed victimize those around them, then it's not misuse of heroin, it's simply use of heroin, right? Whereas misuse of alcohol is what leads to people getting behind the wheel and killing people. And I'm sympathetic to that argument because there are certain substances which seem like they are that bad. If you looked at reasonable pot smokers, reasonable alcoholics, or reasonable people who drink alcohol, I should say, because alcoholics would be non-reasonable, right? These are people who are misusing a substance that could be used in a more still recreational, but not such a impactful way, right? Whereas heroin, it doesn't really seem like you have functioning heroin addicts, right?
Very rare. Very rare.
Exactly. So I think that's a good argument to be had. To be honest with you, I would welcome that debate on a legislation floor because I can sympathize with both points. But right out the gate, as far as like a federal heroin law, I just flat out no. I don't think the federal government should have any involvement in the drug trade whatsoever.
That was a great point about the actual crime that's being committed when these things are outlawed. I think I hadn't really thought that through. When like it's like with alcohol, it's the harm to the others that's an issue, and it's kind of true with drugs oftentimes too. They'll often first make a substance in a certain quantity, a possession is not a crime, and then so they're basically going after the dealers or something, too, which is kind of another aspect of it as well. I would say, like, people profiting black market of it, and damaging potentially more people or getting more people addicted to it. But that almost seems like not the way to go either as far as prosecuting. Although, like, you can't help but be sympathetic to that too, like distribution being, obviously more of a potential harm, but if you're going for like a principle, it doesn't really work. Like, how far can you go in preventing harm to individuals, and what would, I don't know. That doesn't seem very principled when you go that direction, but I know, like, the interesting dynamic to that transcript of the guys talking about, cutting off this national bill, Sunday Sabbath bill or whatever. But it's interesting that at that same time, that was during when they did what do you call it, outlawing alcohol or whatever nationally,
right? Prohibition.
Prohibition. Yeah, and Ellen White and most of the Adventists, I presume, they were very much anti, like, don't get involved with, like, they weren't big on voting and being involved with that. They kind of have that strain of, conservative fundamentalists or whatever. But, like, so they, if I recall, like, there was a lot of deliberation about the prohibition thing. And I think Ellen White was really big on the idea that it should be stopped, because she appealed to like the damage it does to families and stuff like that. And so they were all gung ho about that. At the same time, they're arguing, how would you look at that differently or the same? Like, I mean, these people were, you know, I can tend to sympathize with the idea of like protecting children, and like we're like in this society that, you know, that's a certain way now, a lot less conservative in a certain sense, right? Or moral, or what, however you want to look at it. Like, obviously alcohol probably seemed worse to them, I guess, whatever that means. I don't know. What do you make of that?
I'm not a fan of prohibition at all.
Yeah, right.
I think
Me neither.
And I'm even kind of, I'm somewhat loose with what I think about alcohol laws too. A lot of people say that 21 is too old, and I agree, but I don't actually stop at 18. It seems to me like a 16-year-old is an adult. A 16-year-old should be able to make adult decisions, including but not limited to drinking a beer. That's the way it is in every other country in the world. So I don't understand why it's not the way here.
But wait, I don't think 25-year-olds should be able to vote even. Well, maybe you, but.
Well, so to be fair though, I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I got some pretty interesting thoughts on voting too. Which is that I don't know that the majority of people should vote. Like, as much of a gut punch as it is to say that, you know, Aristotle talked about, and I'm not even kidding. We're talking 300 BC Greek philosophers, right? I mean, a little bit before that, but still. Aristotle talked about how, you know, the only people who really should be voting are elders with skin in the game, meaning people of a certain age who are landowners, business owners, workers, potentially, right? But like your run of the mill. I'll just put this actually in its most blunt format. A 40-year-old man who doesn't have a job and lives with mom should not vote. Like, I genuinely believe that. I don't think he should be allowed to vote. He doesn't contribute to society, but he's going to make decisions on how it's run. You know what I mean? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And well, I'll kind of just end it with that. But the point is that I am looking for opportunities to get people to not vote, if I'm being realistic with you.
Yeah, no, there are some certain circumstances or ways to look at it. Like, I tend to agree with that too, but I think on the other hand, there's certain circumstances, I can't think of any right now, but I remember thinking where that could be a problem, like as far as could cause oppressive outcomes in a certain sense that doesn't seem fair either, but that I hadn't necessarily thought through, and I can't even think of what it was. It was,
well, I can tell you one way actually right off the bat, because as somebody who's very sympathetic would be a soft word to use, but to the Native American plight in this country, the majority of them are jobless and living under the poverty line. And it's not a small majority. Depending on what res you're on, it can be upwards of 80%. And so effectively anything that, put your ability to vote, put the stock in your ability to vote in something like your contribution to society would effectively eliminate most of the indigenous population. That could be a problem. Especially considering the fact that the indigenous population is where they are primarily because of what the government has done to them. And so you have workarounds like that, or not workarounds, excuse me, but you have problems like that would have to be worked around. I'm not interested in disenfranchising a certain race of people, especially a race of people who I think is probably more persecuted, at least at this side of the pond, than any other race of people. you know, and so it's not without its flaws for sure.
Yeah, you almost need the balance of people to vote, or like it'd be hard to like just not do it like we do it, but because you could come up with some system where like like a scale or something, but that seems problematic for other reasons. But I think it should just not be lowered for sure as far as age goes, for a multitude of reasons. And it seems like there should be some kind of balance based on how much skin you have in the game. In some sense, that makes sense too, but that would almost be impossible to try to make a system for. So yeah, I mean, is that just, it doesn't make sense to have equal say when you don't have equal skin in the game, essentially, is the problem. But at the same time, you can't, I don't know that a democratic republic would do well any other way other than just the age, I guess.
Well, one thing that it is important to remember, and this doesn't necessarily mean that what I said is right, it's just simply something to keep in mind. The majority of Americans did not vote for most of our history. Right. First off, there's the fact that women couldn't vote for a long period of time, which I'm not advocating, by the way. I'm just making a point. Then, of course, you have the fact that non-whites couldn't vote for a long period of time. Then there's the fact that the voting age used to be, I think, like 30. It was a lot older than what we consider now. And then even on top of that, there was a point in time when only landowners were allowed to vote, which would effectively eliminate both of us, right? And in fact, that would eliminate in the modern day basically everybody. You couldn't do something like that today, I think. But the point just kind of being that we've really only had a population that voted consistently and broadly since like the 60s, 1960s, that is. But before then, most Americans didn't vote, whether because they couldn't or also just because they didn't care, right? That's another thing, is a lot of people just have not cared for a long time. One of the unfortunate things about polarizing issues like abortion is everybody has an opinion about it, and so everybody goes to the polls.
Hey, check this out. It's a 2-minute clip. I just want to get your reaction. Maybe you've seen it, but this is interesting. This is a shocking claim. Here we go.
Movie Hillary's America, I made a statement. I said, in 1860, the year before the Civil War, I said, no Republican owned a slave. Not no Republican leader owned a slave, no Republican in the country owned a slave. All the slaves in the United States, 4 million of them, were owned by Democrats. Now, you might ask why I would make such a statement. The reason I made it is I would go to campuses and speak about the topic, and professors in very good colleges would typically say to me something like this: well, Dinesh, you've made some excellent points, but I find your talk extremely simplistic. You've got to realize that on difficult topics like slavery, there's a great deal of blame to go around. Both parties are implicated, and there's a lot of wrongdoing on all sides. It would be good of you to at least acknowledge that. So this is the kind of squid-like cloud of obfuscation that it is my career desire to puncture. So hence my outrageous statement. But it's outrageous only in the sense that it's actually a beautifully scientific claim. Scientific in the sense of being eminently refutable. I'm not making some abstract claim, I'm making a factual claim, and all you have to do is give me the name of one Republican who owned a slave, and I would have to take it back and eat crow. But to this date, there has not been a single counterexample. One guy, a PhD student at the University of Michigan, I believe, wrote me several months ago. He goes, Dinesh, I gotcha. Ulysses S. Grant inherited a slave, a solitary slave, mind you, on his wife's side. And I said, well, ordinarily that might be kind of a touche, but I do wish to point out to you that at the time that this happened, Ulysses S. Grant was a Democrat. So he became a Republican later.
Have you heard that before? That's so funny. I find that fascinating. I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, the reason he can make that statement is because it's definitional. The Republican Party was an abolitionist party when it was first founded. So to be a Republican who owned a slave would be kind of like being a pastor who didn't believe in God, right? It's a contradiction in terms. So and Dinesh he's very clever in using that, actually, because the point he's trying to make is the very inception of the Republican Party was abolition to slavery. That was the deal, right? There wasn't another deal. In fact, it was kind of a single party group after the abolition of slavery. There was kind of some active questions. Okay, well, what do we believe exactly, right? Because we all just kind of centered around abolishing this thing, and now we did it. And so, like, do we have ideas about capitalism, for example, the Constitution, et cetera? And that all got hammered out very quickly in the end because Andrew Johnson was such an awful president that basically everybody after him was a Republican.
Yeah, I think also though he's trying to say, like, it's often characterized as like, I mean, not to say this isn't necessarily wrong, but like in today's political, climate or whatever, like everybody kind of thinks of it like, well, just a matter of geography. Not necessarily. I'd say that's less accurate. Say, well, the North was against slavery. It wasn't. That's not entirely as accurate as saying, like, yeah, you can't be a Republican and own a slave, but that's not necessarily the case, is it? I mean, it wasn't just founded on anti-slavery, right? But we often
that was the sole reason for the party. They were founded as an abolitionist party, and they were kind of a single issue party at first. So, like, for example, if you've ever heard the aforementioned Alaskan Independence Party that I talked about, right? The Alaskan Independence Party has one belief, and that is that Alaska should be independent. And so you can have a whole varying range of eco-communists and anarcho-capitalists and syndicalists and libertarians and Burkean conservatives, as long as they all agree that Alaska should be independent, right? Because that's the party platform. And the Republicans were the same thing when they were first founded. We have one view: slavery should not, right? There isn't another view as far as Union versus Confederate. Well, that wasn't an issue yet. As far as should we have stronger states' rights or stronger federal government, well, everybody agreed that states' rights were a good thing. It really wasn't until after the Civil War that states' rights became as contentious as they were, and that was because of the Civil War. But you know what I mean? So, like, when Lincoln gets elected in 1860, he's being elected amongst a group of abolitionists by a group of abolitionists. And so it's kind of like, that's why I compare it to the pastor not believing in God. It is as definitional as having a pastor who doesn't believe in God.
They do exist.
And that's fair. That is fair.
But no, but you're you're totally right. Well, what would you say to somebody who said the Civil War really had nothing to do with slavery?
I understand why they would say it, because historically speaking, the Civil War's link to slavery has really just been used as a way to badmouth Southerners, and that's unfair. I would say that's a wrong view. If you had to give what was the Civil War about in a word, the word would be slavery. The problem with that is just that it's not something that can be accurately described in a word, right? Let me weave an analogy that I think would perfectly.
That's about right. Yeah, please do.
Let's say in 2016, Hillary Clinton was elected president. and she made a campaign promise on election night. I will absolutely, beyond any shadow of a doubt, ban assault rifles, and nobody will stop me. And she says it in her politically expedient way, but that's the gist, right? And let's say Texas is not having it. Rick Perry, I think, was still governor at that time. It might have been Greg Abbott by then, but regardless, whoever's the governor, we'll call him Greg Perry, right? And mix them together. I'm just kidding. But the point is, they just decide we're not having it. The legislature decides we're not having it. The people decide we're not having it. They secede. And when they secede, they say, we seceded because Hillary Clinton, the newly elected president, wants to take away our firearms, and that is something enshrined in the Second Amendment. We refuse to give them up. Now, pause real quick. Is this war about gun rights? Well, yeah. I mean, that's what she wanted to take. That's what the state of Texas wants to preserve. It's a very simple, short, sweet answer. But is it just about gun rights? Of course not. There's a huge context there of Texas being fed up with federal oversight and Texas being fed up with a incredibly leftist Democratic Party that they don't feel represents them, and Texas not liking the fact that the coastal cities have so much say over their over what they do in Texas, even though Texas is thousands of miles away from either of the coasts. Even though it does have its own coast, but I mean like the east and west coast. You know what I mean? And so there would be all this great context. I mean, the fact that Texas is talking about seceding like once every 5 weeks, right, would be part of that context. The existence of the Environmental Protection Agency would be part of that context, and you could go on. And the fact of the matter is, the reason you could go on is because it's a far more complicated issue than Clinton don't like guns. But that's the straw that broke the camel's back, though. That's the big issue that got everybody fighting.
She ugly too.
That's true. But you see what I mean, though? It's like, and that's a similar thing that you had with slavery. Was slavery the problem? Yes, it was. Like, it definitely was. But to oversimplify the Civil War to slavery is to do, in my opinion, a miscarriage to history.
Yeah. So last question, or last topic, it's kind of, but like PETA and PAWS and what's it called? Those kind of organizations. You know what those are? So what do you know about those? Like, what do you think about? I know some of them have very different outlooks on what would be the proper position for animals and humans to live peacefully together, if you want to say it that way, or give animals more rights or whatever. But so I know some of them like are against having pets, and they're not so much against animal cruelty or suffering so much as they are about dignity or something, almost, like you could say. Maybe you could speak to that, like, because I found it very strange how some of them, like, they're really offended by the idea that you could keep an animal as a pet. So they think you're like being a speciesist or something. And then other ones are more concerned with just animal welfare, and they could care less about people owning animals.
Yeah, well, for me personally, I'm very big on the ideas of animal rights and animal dignity. But I do think that there's a reason the tree hugger stereotype exists, and it's because those people are insufferable. Like pet ownership, I think, is a great example, because a wolf will die somewhere between the ages of 4 and 6, likely without a descendant, likely living most of its life hungry and cold and fearing for its life and scrapping with not only the other members of the pack, but a bear and all that. And my dogs, Lord willing, of course, because it's all in his control, but they will likely live 12 to 15 years. They will likely never experience serious hunger in their entire lives. There are certain diseases that their wolf ancestors and cousins get that they will never get. And there are certain other diseases that their wolf ancestors and cousins will get that they will get and be done with in a couple of days, thanks to the vet that I have right down the street. And my point there is just, in every way you can possibly conceive, with the exception of quote freedom, the wolf's life is better by being a husky in my house than it is being a wolf in its own den. And that's frankly even true of livestock. I mean, there are more cows in America than there are wild bovines in the entire world, right? Combine all the bison, all the yaks, all the water buffalo, put them all together. There's more cattle in America than there are every single one of those things in the entire world. And it's not even close, by the way. It's not even remotely close. And you have a similar thing going on with wolves versus dogs, with wild cats versus house cats, and etc. Right? And so my thing is to put a pin on it. We are the dominant species. We are given that dominance by God, and it would be wrong of us to relinquish that dominance. But just as we would expect a king not to abuse his citizens just because he has dominance over them, I think also we should not abuse the creatures below us just because we have dominance over them. And I would even go as far as to say pet ownership is it's kind of a really big responsibility. I mean, really the way you should think about it when you buy a dog is, this is God's dog. This is God's little puppy. He made it. He fashioned it. He knows every hair on his head, knows his name, loves him more than I ever will. I better make sure I'm taking real good care of God's dog, right? Or he's going to have a problem with me. And that might sound a little weird to some people, but I genuinely believe that. It's his farm. It's his cows. It's his dog. It's his sheep. And whatever love you have for that dog, God's is greater, because he literally made the thing and he fashioned each individual fang and all of it.
But what about, like, so do you think surely every animal won't go to heaven, at least?
Well, I don't know. I don't know how that works, to be honest.
I'd like to think it's so, but I mean, who would be the heaven's cat lady?
Well, maybe heaven is.
I vote for vote for Jonathan Pritchett or Mike Winger.
Right.
No, I want that to be the case, but it's hard. Like, cause some of these animals have clearly have personalities, like more so than some people even.
Well, and I know that there's going to be animals there because Isaiah 11 and elsewhere describe animals there. Are they going to be the individual animals who were born here? I guess it's hard to say. I can say not from scripture, but from my own intuition, which is not even close to as valid, but I digress. I could not imagine creating a thing that you did not profoundly adore. And if it were possible for you to keep that thing, I would assume you want to keep that thing.
Yeah, good point. But at the same time, can an animal have some trait that makes it not fit for eternal life? You know what I mean? It gets tricky, but my intuition says the same thing. But at the same time, I think if I had every cat I ever owned, I would be a cat lady.
Well, but maybe if you had every cat you ever owned and an eternity to love them, it might be a little different. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm it's kind of funny. I'm joking around at the same time, but I think, especially because I just think I can think of especially a larger dog. It makes sense that you would be reunited with them, but then at the same time, then once I go there, it's you can't stop. Then it's cats, obviously. Then for the same reason, you wouldn't want to put a threshold on it, but you can't go down to every animal that ever lived. That didn't really make sense, probably. And so I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I can't think of the purpose of a lot of insects we have.
Well, this will be kind of my last point because I am getting a little tired, but I can distinctly tell you about the moment when I realized how awesome a centipede was. And it's not awesome like a kid says something is awesome, but awesome in the sense that they were awe-inspiring. This creature is so impressive, right? It's so intricate. It's
Oh
such
yeah.
an awesome display of God's handiwork. And it actually it eliminated my fear of them almost instantly. I saw this. I went from seeing this creature as repugnant and terrifying to
No way to,
just such an incredible example of, I mean, I couldn't even imagine creating something like that. All the great cathedrals of the world are nothing compared to God's centipedes. You know what I mean?
don't go yet. Let me ask you one thing about that though. Like if I presume I'm going to presume that you take the same view as me on like the fall and then speciation is greatly like made caused speciation on some level or something that you could say they're still the same kinds of animals, but like there's subspecies, right? Of like over time. And some of those subspecies, let's say, well, almost in every sense, like even if you think of a dog, like did God make a dog? No, probably not. Obviously he didn't make huskies, right? And so,
Right.
so when he restores the earth, it doesn't really make sense how you it would make a lot of sense to me in my mind when I think about it that like you'd restore the original kinds, and then that would eliminate these animals that are half, reduced to a fallen state, would make them predators, etc. So like, how does God choose which ones that He reinstates? If like most of, basically almost all of them have deteriorated into these subspecies that have traits that weren't originally, or let's say weren't originally a perfect creation. I hadn't really thought about that. I think I've brought it up before, but what do you make of that? Like dogs are different, I suppose, because they're almost like rebred into more like what I would imagine original kind would be like. So I don't really have an issue with that. But it is interesting to wonder about insects, for instance, like the purpose in a perfect creation. It's kind of hard to even think of how that works. Although I can come up with a few ideas. But millipedes, centipedes, I mean, like a millipede, the ones that are poisonous, like it looks pretty certain that like their front spines are modified legs of some kind. And if there's anything like that original kind, I would suspect it at least doesn't have poisonous pincers or whatever. And I wonder if that was like a modified thing that happened as a result of the fall, that it became, that front legs became, poisonous, whatever. Maybe they had some sort of modification along those lines originally that didn't use poison, like a snake's venom or something. But I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
I guess my only one would just be that I think that I could see like a husky individually being in heaven if it had some equivalent of a glorified body. Obviously not the same thing that we would get, but something unperishable. Because they're subspecies of
Yeah.
human technically. We
Right.
don't use that word because it's very dehumanizing. But I mean, just go look at a black person. You know what I mean? Like he ain't the same as you. He is, in the sense that you're both equally valid human beings made in the image of God. But look at your hair compared to his. Look at your nose compared to his. Look at
Look
the
at Larry
thickness of
Bird.
your.
Larry
Yeah.
Bird was a great ball player, but let's be honest, he didn't have as many fast twitch muscle fibers.
Well, I mean, seriously though, right? Or look at a white hippie with dreadlocks versus a Rasta with dreadlocks, and they're not the same hairstyle. They're kind of the same hairstyle, but the fact that their hair is so fundamentally different, they're not. And though what that is quote unquote breeds or subspecies of human. Um, and again, there's a reason we don't use that terminology. It's because it's very dehumanizing, and we want to make sure everybody knows that we're all equally valid as human beings.
Yeah, we're all subspecies of the original humans in a sense, right?
Yeah, exactly. We're no more natural than a black person is. In fact, I'll bet the Middle Easterns are probably the closest to natural. That's just my personal inclination, but
Yeah, well, originally I think so. It seems that way. Like they have more diversity, and so we seem like a more kind of like a poodle compared to a husky. A poodle is more like constrained in their variability, let's say.
yeah.
But to individual, and any quote unquote race can be more or less than someone else in those subcategories. But yeah, I think it seems to me a lack of melanin is more of a constrained subgroup than the other way around. In other words, that's just one trait, of course, and it doesn't really matter anyway. But
Well, and the main point to finish there is just to say that in the same way that I expect me and my black friend, who is also a Christian, will both be restored, despite the fact that racially speaking, we may have different flaws, considering the different lineages by which our genetics have broken down. I could see the same thing happening for animals. It's just a matter of whether or not God wants to.
yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a good place to stop. I imagine that, yeah, you kind of can almost get a grasp on the kind of traits that get bred into dogs, like as being a way to like imagine what kind of went wrong. I mean, there are young Earth creationist studies that kind of show things that we would suspect would be traits that were more, part of the original kind, like just temperament, and the kind of temperament that would get bred into the wild, whatever you're going to call it, subspecies of wolves or whatever, that they would be kind of constrained into like a certain kind of or trait that would be extension or would be, come out more commonly when the environment's harsh, so, and then breeding the dogs, it's much easier to breed in better traits, more like the original ones or whatever, however that works. I can't speak to it very well, but all right, man. Thanks. That was good talk. Interesting stuff. Thanks for coming on. See you later.
Absolutely, man, and God bless you.